Yeah, the Tesseract. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting that you're bringing that. Almost there. All right, we're tuned. Ready when you are, folks.
And instead of my usual lame, no offense, instead of our usual guitar riff that we play tonight, Simeon has kindly agreed to play us a little intro music. Take it away, Sim.
Okay, thanks a lot, Terry. These are two Irish reels. I spent 6 months in Ireland as a 3-year-old. My dad worked over there for the Bank of Ireland. He was an economist in international, economics. And when I was 3, we went over there. And I just, ever since I've loved Celtic Irish music, I just think, as a young kid, it sinks in. So I'm going to play you 2 Irish reels that'll make me feel like 3 years old again, walking around. We lived in Dublin, the outskirts of Dublin. And so here's the Flax and the Bloom and the Pure Drop, okay?
Bravo.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, and if folks want to listen to any of this, it's on all the streaming services. Just put in my name, and I've got 5 recordings, 5 CDs and tapes out there.
You've got 5 now.
Love it.
Yeah, 5 of my own original music. It's just, Terry, we don't know where music comes from, but I always have songs showing up. And you get them down, they become nice songs, and that's how it works.
Hello and welcome to the Devil's Den. My name is Terry Lovelace. I'm here with my co-host, my good friend, Aaron Montgomery. Hi, Aaron.
Hello. How's it going?
Couldn't be better. tonight's special guest, all of our guests are special, but tonight's guest really genuinely is special. My friend, Simeon Hein, who introduced me to so much cool stuff that I never even knew existed. Simeon has a PhD in sociology. He's a graduate of Washington State University in 1993. And in grad school, he learned about linear causation, cause and effect, and statistics. Statistics was the only math class I've ever had that I enjoyed. I took 2 classes and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was just the coolest stuff. It wasn't solve for X kind of stuff, you know. It was interesting. I liked it. So, and I'm sure it's a big part of what you do. Simeon is the director of the Institute for Resonance Viewing in Boulder, Colorado, and it's a nonprofit organization. I suggest if you have any interest at all in remote viewing or resonance viewing, go look up the Institute for Resonance Viewing in Boulder, Colorado. Sam became a remote viewer in 1996, and he attended the Institute in Atlanta. Was it?
Yeah, Farsight
Institute in Atlanta. And you work with some government types, including the famous Swan.
Well, I met him a couple times, yeah.
Yeah, probably the best remote viewer, that's what I've heard, that ever walked the earth. There are 2 books I want to mention real quick because you need to know about them. Black Swan Ghost, available on Amazon, with 15 cool stories in it, and a whole lot of really good information, and the illustrations are priceless. And then my favorite book, Opening Minds. This is a heck of a read. I just really enjoy this book. Crop circles. I mean, it's got a little bit of everything in it, and it is absolutely worth a read. I love some of the remote viewing, the targets like the Washington Monument, and then the viewers' rendition. Just amazing stuff. Well, thank you for coming. It's good to have you here tonight.
Yeah,
man, we got a lot to talk about.
We do.
I know that my son was at Michigan State University back in the day, and he introduced me to the concept of fractals. And then I saw him in your book, and I thought, oh yeah, I know this stuff. This stuff is cool. This stuff is amazing.
Right.
I remember my son and I cut my wife's cabbage in half, and went out to look for pine cones. And we did all that stuff.
Yeah, because nature is fractally based. It's based on fractals. What fractals are self-similar patterns, and we see it in vegetables all the time. You go slice a cabbage in half, you're going to see those spirals and self-repeating patterns. The broccoli romanesco, with these wonderful phi ratio. Phi ratio is the ratio of 1.6 to 1. We see fractals in music, Terry. There's something called the 1/f spectra, which in music, and all types of music actually, where there's more variation in treble notes than in bass notes. Even the songs I just played for you, you're going to hear a lot more variation up top than at the bottom. Why? It's just how our particular reality is shaped. The one that we experience, you and I and everyone listening, watching. 1/f spectra, fractal. And so self-similarity is how nature works. And yet we as modern humans think we know better. And we're going to put lines everywhere, right? We're going to put lines and right angles, perfect circles, make it fit these kind of, Greek patterns that we learned from, Aristotle and the sacred shapes, that it has to fit those. And we still design things that way.
Yeah.
But nature doesn't really work that way. Nature works based on fractals. You just see this. Look at trees, for example, right? Branching smaller. So we're the ones that stick out like a sore thumb. and we're baffled that we can't figure out these mysteries that you and I and the audience are so fascinated by, right? Because we insist on it being linear, mechanistic, Cartesian, right? Linear, that it's just these simple units that you repeat over and over again. We can't accept that things scale out to huge scales and then to tiny scales with these fractal patterns. And that's our challenge, Terry. That's our challenge.
Is that, I hear the Fibonacci number and I see that this is what we're talking about, right?
That's what we're talking about. Yeah. Fibonacci sequences, phi ratio spirals, golden mean. If I had thought about it, I would have gotten my golden mean calipers out. But basically, golden mean is the ratio of 1.6 to 1. And you'll find throughout your body, you find these ratios in your bone structure, 1.6 to 1, throughout the entire body, many proportions. And Leonardo da Vinci
is famous.
That's a phi ratio shaped human.
Yeah. And
just so the audience knows, women are more closely proportioned to the phi ratio than men.
I think I've noticed that.
They're more perfect mathematically than we are.
Okay, so we need to announce this to the world now.
Let's
make people more aware of this.
We just did.
Yeah.
But let's keep talking about it.
It matters. And so the ancients actually knew about phi ratios and golden sections, things that are natural proportions. Somehow in the modern world, we've decided that efficiency matters more than aesthetics and resonance. So we design everything according to these very linear, mechanistic sort of efficiency criteria. And we think we're so smart until we realize that, we've also made it easier for disasters and catastrophes to happen because those phi ratios, fractal patterns create resilience and what some people call anti-fragility. They give kind of a natural strength to systems like trees. Trees can lose a branch and they'll still be okay, right? Because they branch out. But when we have catastrophes in the modern world, it's just like wipes everything out because everything is so square and linear. We had a flood here in Boulder in 2013. And the water was just going down those roads that you normally just think of as a place to walk and, drive. It's also good pathways for water to come right to your house, right?
Man-made.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was hiking yesterday. I'm in Colorado as well. I'm in
Montrose.
Yeah, I'm in Montrose. I was in Ouray yesterday, and we hiked up to Box Canyon. And as I was standing, on the cliffside, and these huge pine trees around me, and just watching them sway in the wind because it was pretty windy yesterday. And my thought was, maybe this is why in San Francisco and the earthquake areas, they're actually starting to incorporate some of this free movement, with the buildings, just because this is, you got to move with. And, I could hear it creaking, but I knew that the trees weren't going to fall down. I knew that a little bit of movement was not necessarily bad. It was kind of creepy standing up there and seeing them sway really big around.
But they survived it. They survive it and they get stronger.
Absolutely.
And we are just starting to pick this up, green design, sustainability, things that can withstand some changes and stress, basically, without cracking. Because they're not just built for efficiency, they're built for, resiliency, sustainability. But this is something that our Western tradition hasn't really done a very good job of processing.
Oh, and you know what? I thought about fractals back in the day when my son and I were talking about it. I thought this must be this must be the end result of millions of years of selection. Finding out what works best, and this is the finished product we're looking at. It's the best it can be.
Right. That's how I look at it too, Terry, is nature knows what it's doing. And nature designed things to be built in a fractal way. There's even this idea that the universe has a fractal component to it, galaxy structures, and even these constants that make up physics.
Mhm.
Some of the quantum physicists like Schrodinger and especially Paul Dirac were really interested as to why there were some of these exact proportions between the width of an atom and the width of a galaxy or the universe, something like that. That you found these proportions at the smallest scale and the largest scale. The whole thing had evolved this way. No one studied those ideas. So we've forgotten about Dirac's law of large numbers and Schrodinger's ideas, but they were looking for these fundamental constants, and it's called self-similar cosmological model. There was a guy, I think his name is Robert Oldfield from Amherst, Mass, that once wrote me after opening minds. And he said, I don't know if you realize this, but these principles apply on a galactic scale too.
Wow.
So it's something that we're rediscovering. And I agree with you, Terry. Nature built us a certain way because we're very resilient. Now, the simple explanation for fractals is it's how nature gets a lot of volume into a limited surface area, right? Because if you have lots, fractal means fractured. And if you have lots of little curves in and out and smaller and smaller scales, more detail, you have a lot of surface area, like a tree, leaves, to capture sunlight. But there's another element of this, which I've only realized recently, not when I studied this in sociology. It gives us a certain frequency too.
A frequency.
Fractal dimension is measured for systems have a dimension between 1 or 2 or 2 to 3, like clouds. Clouds have a fractal dimension 2.3, 2.4. They're not completely three-dimensional objects because the closer you go, the more space you see between the water droplets. They don't fill the space.
Yes.
But they're not flat like we were talking about in Flatland a few minutes ago before we started. They're not a flat surface, but they're not a completely three-dimensional object that completely fills the space because they're filled with space between the water droplets. They're between dimensions. Do you see where this is going?
I do. Is it kind of the same concept of looking at a galaxy and seeing a cluster of stars that look like they're tightly packed together, but there's millions of miles between each object?
Right. That tight packing can be measured as a fractal dimension. And it is used in JPEGs. You know, JPEG images are fractally compressed, and satellite compression of information. Let me just shut my door for a second. There's just a little noise coming in.
Oh, sure.
There's systems have dimensions, and it gives them a kind of like a frequency. And fractal objects are actually between dimensions. They're interdimensional objects because they're not a flat surface like our Flatland, Edwin Abbott. We were talking about this a few minutes ago. They're not a tabletop surface, but they're not completely three-dimensional because that's just full. They're in between, and we're in between. And that means we're picking up other objects and energy and frequencies on a certain range of dimensions, fractal dimension.
And are those measurable?
Yes. And that's what I did my dissertation on in sociology, because I realized what I'd been, statistics was too limited. It was looking at it from a linear point of view, fitting everything to a regression line.
Yeah.
But if you look at any pieces of data, they're never usually quite in a line. They're scattered. So another way to look at data sets is as what is the packing of all the data? How densely packed is it? And just to be simple about it, the more densely packed it is, the higher dimension. As it gets less densely packed, the dimension gets a little lower until it's flat again. Anyway, all these things that we see around us are at a particular fractal dimension, and you could look at that as a fractal, as a frequency. So you have to ask yourself, would we perceive objects and entities and things that are at different fractal dimensions than we're used to? Would they fit in the same space, but we wouldn't see them? This is new ideas. I didn't see, when I was writing my dissertation, I didn't know anything about these topics, Terry, this was all new. This is pre-remote viewing for me, but then I connected it, that they're fractal systems and their ranges of fractals. And it's an important principle that we're rediscovering. That's awesome.
I just had a recent conversation with somebody. We were talking about how something like 6% of the universe we can see with our eyes or with instruments or perceive. And something like 94% of it is outside of our perception. We know that it's there, black or dark matter, dark energy.
Right.
but we don't know what it is. We know that it's there because mathematically it has to be there, but we can only see 6%.
Right.
I mean, we're stumbling around here like Helen Keller. You know, we're so limited perceptual wise that there's just could be a whole lot going on. We just can't see. We're not equipped to see.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up, Terry, because people often come to people like you and me and saying, where's the science behind what you're talking about? You know, UFOs, where's it? And then you have to remind them, just like you said, physicists, astrophysicists don't even know 94% of our own universe because it's 34% dark and matter, 68% dark energy, and even the remaining matter, it's like highly obscured. You can only see a little bit of it. So you're like, where's the universe? The physicists don't know. Where is all this dark energy coming from? The dark energy being the force that pushes things apart.
Because the universe is expanding exponentially and faster and faster.
So some things like has to be pushing on it. And is it what you're reading about, is it a parallel reality that's doing that? Are there other unseen factors? But when people say to folks like us in our audience, well, where are these UFOs? I don't see anything outside. I'm looking, well, where's the dark matter and the dark energy? It's measurable everywhere. There's even a little bit of dark energy right where we are right now. I forgot what it is. It's like 1 particle per million dark energy. Same with dark. No, it's around us. And dark matter is a little bit around, but where is it? You can't see it. You can't detect it, but it has to figure in gravitationally. Now, people come up with, I mentioned this, exactly what you're saying. People say, well, there's alternative explanations. There are some alternative explanations to dark matter. Maybe it's just a calculation error. None of those have ever worked out. They don't work out. You talk to the average astrophysicist, Terry and Aaron, and they will say, we can't find it. It's there, but we can't see it. So then I say, well, if we don't know what 94, 5, 6% of the universe is, how can we rule out other beings, other civilizations, other life forms? Maybe we can't see all the life forms. You can't see all the matter. Isn't it possible that matter makes up living things, like our matter makes up living things? It's not such a stretch when you think about it that way.
What is that one experiment where they have the light beaming through a thing and the photons?
Yeah, double slit experiment.
Yeah, the double slit and perception of looking at changes the outcome. And so if that happens, why wouldn't that be the same thing with dark matter? I mean, because we're looking for it, it's not going to be seen. Just like the double slit, if we look at it, it changes the results. So I think that, we've got
measuring it changes it. Yeah, measuring it changes it. Even if you put detectors there, but no one's looking through them, it affects the double slit experiment. Just having photonic detectors measuring these little photons as they come across affects the double slit experiment, as long as they're plugged in. So that means just taking a measurement, not even a human observing it, but anything that's measuring the system affects how matter works. And that's the fundamentals. What you're bringing up is the fundamental paradox within quantum mechanics, is why does it have particle-like properties, but the particles act in a wave-like way? Even when there's one at a time and you're putting them through the slit, you would expect kind of an even pattern. If you did that with little grains of sand, they'd go this way or that way, but that's not how it works with double slit. You send them through one at a time, you still get this interference pattern, which is really weird, and no one's ever been able to explain it. The people that look at what I'm interested in, which is parallel realities, show that you can recreate the double slit experiment just with parallel realities being there. So Terry, if you take some of this dark universe that we can't see, and you say maybe some of it's parallel realities, that does a nice job of reproducing what you see with the double slit experiment, just assuming that there's realities there you can't see if you model it mathematically. So that's one alternative, is that there's a multiverse. There's parallel realities. There's different ways of looking at this, but they're parallel reality. And that's what Hugh Everett said in 1957. We're filled, Terry, it's not just dark energy and dark matter. Any theory that's been like different has been ignored. It's not our fault that we don't have any clue to this UFO phenomena and these other topics. Scientists have proposed alternatives 50 years ago, before you and I were probably around. Well, before I was around, definitely, and probably before you were around too, Terry. Definitely you, Aaron. Of parallel realities. How do we deal with this double slit experiment, and why does it seem particle-like and wave-like? And one alternative way to look at it is all these different descriptions of reality that you see from a wave-like pattern, they don't collapse and disappear. They're there, but we can't perceive them. Just like you're saying, Terry, with the dark matter, and that's what other ways of, but that view was not popular in the 50s. They wanted to go with the Copenhagen interpretation, which says kind of what you're saying, Aaron, that there's all you see is what you only get what you see. There's nothing else. The other possibilities described by the quantum wave function disappear. It's called the disappearing world theory. And physics, I can't help, Terry, but notice that this disappearing world theory, which so many physicists are unhappy with nowadays, Sean Carroll wrote this great book recently called Something Deeply Hidden to try to flesh this out. They joke it's called like disappearing worlds, modern physics, quantum mechanics, because you're only supposed to look at what the outcome of that one experiment, whatever the particle is doing, but where did the other particles go and what are the wave function? Well, they said, don't ask. We don't know. It's not real anymore. Don't ask us. And some people said, well, that's not really fair. With the quantum mechanics says there's waves of possibilities that describe any particle, groups of particles, huge possibilities, different colors for things, different properties. But where are the other ones? If I see you, Aaron, and you're wearing a dark blouse, you're wearing eyeglasses, you have a certain color around your skin, certain books on your shelf, the painting there. Well, the quantum wave function says that there can be completely different descriptions of that group of particles that makes up you and your room and your clothing. And people have said, well, where are they? And physicists, Copenhagen has always said since 1920s or so, don't ask, don't ask, don't tell. We don't know, don't ask. And that's where it's been for 100 years. People have come forward like David Bohm with the pilot wave theory, saying maybe the particles have their own wave function. At the same time, Hugh Everett proposed parallel realities that you don't see them, but maybe there's other versions of you and me in those other worlds where Aaron is wearing a red blouse instead of a black blouse.
And every possible outcome occurs.
Exactly. They all occur. That's what quantum mechanics is. And we've been told for a long time, shut up and calculate. To me, Terry, this is the root of the challenge of all these phenomena that you've written in your book, which everyone should have this book, by the way. There's great stories in here that Terry had his readers write in. Great idea, Terry. And what is going on with these people? They're telling you what they've experienced. We don't know, but it's a different description of reality, something that you yourself, Terry, experienced with Toby.
And people get so frustrated when they want an answer. What is it? And I say, I can't,
don't know.
We can make assumptions, but what's that worth? I mean, I can only tell you as an objective observer what I saw, and then, then there's, really when I think about it, I think, isn't everything we experience subjective? I mean, can I ever have an objective experience? I mean, if I'm looking at you on the screen, we're separated by 18 inches and the light has to go and travel through my pupil to the retina, to the optic nerve, to the brain. And that takes time. So by the time I'm seeing this image, it's history. So
that's what people have been asking for 100 years. What are we perceiving? This is what really bugged those guys, Erwin, Schrodinger, everybody. Quantum mechanics tells us that everything is waves of probability. Before quantum mechanics, it was electromagnetic. Music. They studied music and waves and cymatics. You remember the sand on the plates, the sand.
Oh, yeah. The images.
They were studying that. Ernst Friedrich Florence Chladni in the late 1700s, early 1800s was studying this. They didn't call it cymatics back then. They called it, I forgot what his term was for it, but we call it cymatics now, modal nodes.
Yeah,
but
he used a bowstring, didn't he?
Exactly right.
Violin,
yes.
Metal plate.
That's right. He used a bowstring on a metal plate, and he went around Europe playing the metal plate, showing that it created these very coherent patterns of sand. And that was a real mystery back then, is how come sound creates these standing waves and makes the sand all line up, the way the trough and the peak of the waves kind of push the air around and push the sand grains. But they mapped it out mathematically, and that became the basis for atomic structure, because they found that electrons are doing the same thing as cymatics, that it's based on frequency, that everything is vibrating. That's what quantum mechanics actually, before the quantum wave function, they were looking at heat emanating from solid bodies, and they found that it was quantized, coming out in these little tiny packets that we now know as the Planck constant. That everything has a fundamental frequency and that everything vibrates, has energy. And the basis of quantum mechanics, what is it? C equals Planck's constant by frequency or something like that. There's these different formulas, but it's all based on energy and frequency. And then quantum mechanics had to deal with multiple electrons. It all started with sound and looking at those patterns. And that's so if it's based on these waves and patterns, right? Sound. Well, why does everything look solid? That's no one can still to this day figure it out.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental mystery. By the way, Aaron, what you're talking about, this double slit, and just a long-winded explanation. And one way to look at it is say that all the possibilities exist, but you and I are just getting a sliver of reality. Mm-hmm. We're only seeing a little bit of it. Now, Terry, you said a few minutes ago that we don't observe most of what we see around us from dark matter and dark energy. Yeah. This is kind of taking that idea a little further, as we're just perceiving a little fraction. Even our senses are only getting a fraction of what is around us, right?
True.
And that flips this all on its head. This says that we don't know what most of reality is. We're just seeing a little sliver of it. I find that exciting, because all these topics that we like to research, that you've experienced personally, that you've wrote about in Incident at Devil's Den, these inexplicable events, and that your readers have written into you in your second book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning. And they come to you and they come to me. What did I experience? What is this? Honestly, we don't know, but we can at least make some progress. I think you'd agree, Aaron, too, by saying they didn't make this up. They experienced this, and the other people they were with, their car really stalled. They really had electrical they saw discs there. We don't know what they're seeing, but it's real. And maybe these are other branches of the wave function that we can't see directly, only occasionally. That doesn't mean it's not real. For some reason, though, guys, we've been so hell-bent on trying to deny this since Roswell. Go figure.
Curious timing.
Yeah. Curious timing.
Well, I mean, if it's something you can't explain, right, you just shove it under the carpet, which is what you've been saying. Like, well, we can't answer this, so we're just not going to look at it. And we're going to pretend like it doesn't exist, when very obviously it does. And it crops up more and more. One of the things that I think about as you're talking here is an expanded level of perception that many of us who experience these things have. I can sit in a room and feel a being enter around me just by the shift in the energies. If I'm around others who have not had these experiences, they're not going to feel it. And it's really happening. I really feel it. And there is somebody standing behind me, and I think once you begin to open to these experiences and these things that are happening around us on a level that we can't perceive with the regular five senses, it just sort of unfolds, the not the universe, but maybe the multiverse, whatever you want to add in there, it just expands, and you can perceive so much more, and it just builds and builds and builds. At least that's my experience. You know, once I acknowledge and let it grow, and I don't know, my world, it just becomes that much more rich on a daily basis, because I know that there's way more out there than can be seen with the eyes.
And it's healthy to take your point of view. We're going to see a big shift in society towards this point of view. Ron Westrom, a sociologist I met at SSE many times, Society for Scientific Exploration, by the way, founded by Jacques Vallée and a couple other, Peter Sturrock, some astronomers, said, how come we can't talk about this at our academic meetings? So we'll form our own organization for people to share scientific research into these anomalous topics. We call them anomalous just because we can't understand them. Yeah. So what Ron Westrom pointed out to us that the whole idea of child abuse didn't exist until 1965 because doctors couldn't believe that parents would do that to kids. They just think parents would never hurt their kids until 1965. And they said they must be falling out of trees, these kids, or being beaten by bullies at school. No parent would ever do that to their child. And it wasn't until 1965, I believe, they had a national meeting in Washington, D.C. of many professionals from different backgrounds, doctors and child workers and psychiatrists, I guess some law enforcement. And they looked at the x-rays. They looked at the x-rays, Terry. They talked and they said, parents are doing this to the kids. And that's when child abuse became recognized. Yeah. It's hard for society to admit that things are going on. These are not easy topics to talk about. And to say that there are other entities around, other beings, at a minimum, other objects in the atmosphere that we can't explain, we don't know how they get here, and we have Zippo control over when they show up, what they do, and who they take. That's hard to admit. And the institutions that say they're in charge of our society, that they protect us, they keep us safe at night, if they say, well, we can't do anything about it, that they won't do that until they're up against the wall. And the Navy recently has said, we don't know what these objects are that's showing up. Our pilots are upset. It's in their flight path. This could be dangerous to flight safety. We want some answers. Yeah. Now, if the Air Force doesn't want to talk, fine, we're going to do this on our own. We're the Navy. We don't need the Air Force to give us permission to talk about this. It seems none of us really know what's going on behind the scenes, but I think we all know what we're talking about here. So it's a big step to admit you're not in control, and for governments to admit, and this is partly what we're dealing with here. Now, Terry got me interested in this subject, which I'll just mention. I watched a David Paulides movie last night. I finally had this feeling I need to watch this. Terry's brought this up. I had some questions on my own YouTube channel, and I didn't know the answer because I wasn't familiar with his work. Missing 411. And he had one that I saw last night called Missing 411, The Hunted, about hunters, where there's groups of hunters out there and one just 20 yards away just disappears, never seen again. They bring out dogs. They bumper searches where they go every square foot for large areas, and they go make a return at nothing.
Yeah, dogs can't catch a scent.
No scent from the best trained bloodhounds. It's inexplicable. It's inexplicable. Now, I hadn't researched this a lot, but we're not talking about people that go out by themselves into the woods. We're people with other people who just, as you mentioned in the beginning of your book, in Devil's Den, that fellow who, was sitting there and his other friend goes back to get the nitroglycerin tablet or something. Is that it?
Yeah, asthma. I think it was his inhaler. He was having an asthma attack. Yeah.
Right. And so apparently this sort of thing, Terry, happens in clusters in different parks and places. And it's inexplicable because the person just got briefly separated from the other person. I'm just bringing this up as an example of something that's hard to talk about as a society. It's not easy to admit that there can be other intelligent forces around that might do that to us.
That a human being can just cease to exist, just disappear.
Yeah, that's not easy to talk about, but Paulides said he didn't start on this out of curiosity. He said national park officials came to him when he was outside, I believe, of Yosemite and said, we have this issue going on that nobody wants to talk about it. You're in law enforcement. Can you help us? So I'm just mentioning this as another type of example, something that you've had some experience with where you had your incident, Terry, where you have inexplicable things that are hard to talk about, but at some point you can't ignore it anymore. And it starts, with the military saying there are these things around and we don't know what they are and they're bugging us. And it starts that way. So anyway, there has to be a national push for people to sit down and instead of just like in quantum mechanics saying, don't ask, don't tell, shut up and calculate, these are disappearing worlds. Don't ask where they go. We have to say, well, where are these people going? We can't just accept this anymore. Anyway, that sort of thing has to happen before we have a national discussion, but I think it's starting to happen. It seems to me.
I hope so. The fourth volume in David Paulides' 411 Missing 411 series is called The Devil is in the Details. And Devil's Den is in there.
Oh, is it? Is it?
Yeah, as well as, all kinds of places. What he did was he laid out the statistics on a spreadsheet and found that parks that have the name Devil or Diablo in them have a higher occurrence of people that just vanish than parks that don't have the name Devil or Diablo in it.
Even in your book, your second book, you have a story of a person who went to an area near Mount Shasta, I believe, which had devil something in the name. And
Mount Diablo, yeah.
Mount Diablo. And he says he's there by the campfire. He wanted some experience and he got it, right? He hears something crunching coming up to him and he can't see anything until it's right in front of him. It's a little being. And then the being's friends show up. All of a sudden he's on the ground, isn't it? And they're doing something. And then he wakes up in the morning and the fire's out and nothing's missing. Missing time. What is that? What is that?
Aaron knows that story well, don't you?
You do?
Mm-hmm. I do.
You know about that story, huh?
Yeah, it's a friend of mine.
It's a friend of yours.
Yeah.
So this is the thing, folks, and this is why I called my book Black Swan Ghosts. And it started talking to my grandmother. My father's family were refugees from Nazi Germany in the 30s. They stayed way late until they didn't leave till like late 37, I believe.
Ooh.
And there were already plenty of anti-Semitic legislation around, but my grandfather had fought in World War I for Germany. He was a doctor and he had been in the German. He said, they're never going to do anything to us. We're veterans, right? You know what the feeling is, Terry. What are they going to do? He didn't want to leave, but it was talking to my grandmother, spending a couple of days with her when I was in college doing an oral history project. I just thought it'd be fun to do. She told me stories that I had never heard her tell before. And then I realized that witnesses often, it's hard to tell stories where you feel like you've been victimized when there's violence, right? When, like Nazi Germany, when your whole society gangs up on you because you're Jewish or just different. They ganged up on lots of different types of people, priests and anyone who was different. They had a category, I think it was called social misfit or something. It was anyone who didn't agree with the Nazi ideology, social outcast or something, anyone who just didn't agree with their point of view. And it's hard to talk. And I realized that from her, that it's not just UFO witnesses. It's anyone who's been in a situation where there's a loss of control and there's unfriendly people around or beings. It's not easy to talk about. And Terry, you know this as an attorney, as a former federal prosecutor. So when she told me when I was like 20, all this stories, I realized that anyone who's been in that situation has stories to tell that really happened. They've never had a chance to tell their story before. And I sat and patiently listened to her for a couple of days and I taped it. I'm glad I still have the cassette tapes and
that's gold.
Anyway, that's how it started with me, Terry. And so when people started telling me their stories after getting involved in the RV, I realized I had to listen because I knew I talked to someone much younger, when I was younger, my grandmother, who had experienced something in Nazi Germany, and that there are stories, witnesses that we need to listen to.
Yeah, there sure are. Whoa. Good point.
And it's not easy. So this society has to come to the point. It's easier to listen to military folk when they're saying, I'm flying my F-18 out there. We're doing our training exercises off the USS Roosevelt. And now all these other ships, this has been going on a lot. And there's things that are in our flight path and we don't feel comfortable with this, and there's nowhere to report it. No one wants to listen. So we're filing these NOTAMs, notice to airmen. And we're kind of actually sick of this because we were told we can practice in safe flight conditions. And, I've had some of these guys on my YouTube channel from the Nimitz and the Princeton incidents. And then you find out, as hard as it is to talk about that, partly because of these GenEp 146 regulations that the Navy and the Air Force put together, I think going back to the 50s, where they said you couldn't talk about this, right? You shouldn't talk about this. Not only do you have this kind of stigma associated with maybe feeling like, it might affect my promotion in my service if I talk about this. You have guys coming aboard, apparently from the Air Force. I guess you're not surprised, Terry, saying, please sign this NDA. You're never going to talk about this again. Not to your sweetie, not to nobody.
Not to your priest, not to your rabbi, not to anybody ever.
No, and they don't. And the government said, don't talk about it. And they're saying, I'm fine with that. This was weird. I don't know. And you've had stories in your book about hunters going out that never want to talk to each other again after their missing time, weird experiences of lights in the forest.
Yeah.
The pig hunting expedition that didn't turn out so well for those guys. But I reread it again, Terry, and I'm just always so astounded. They go and they get together a couple of years later, and it's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So
if you ever read Ray Fowler's book about the Allagash 4 up in
got it
Maine?
right over there on that starter. Yeah, you mentioned it, and I pulled it off the shelf because I had the book, hadn't read it. Yeah.
But yeah, it was the same kind of thing. The band broke up. The 4 guys that hung out together, everybody drifted away, even the twins.
And did you tell me, Terry, the other day that one of them is now saying it never happened?
Yes. It's not the twins, and I don't think it's Rack. It's the other one whose name I can never remember. But one of them is now saying that even though he's been regressed and recovered memory and passed polygraph, he's saying now he has doubts. I think it is really the way.
But they reported it according to what I read in Fowler's book, they reported it to the ranger, and they said, well, it had to be, I don't know, people spotting deer. I don't know, whatever explanations they gave, right?
Yeah.
But they made a ranger report at the time. There's no way this is some making it up later, because there's reports to the ranger and I think they talked to some other people who had seen something the night before. Isn't that right?
The night before, right.
All right, so this. So I've been reading it because I had the book, Terry, but I never had actually read it. And you mentioned it when we did an interview. I said, man, I have no excuse not to read this book. It's Raymond Fowler's book's been sitting. So I've been reading it. And again, it's like a fractal. The deeper you look, the more information you wonder, what are we dealing with here? What is going on? This has been experienced by many people, including yourself. You've so eloquently and bravely written about in your books. When as a society are we going to remove the stigma and allow people to come forward and not feel afraid to tell whatever happened to them, so we can, when we feel better, just get it out in the open?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people like you out there, and Aaron, I'm sure, and they're suffering from PTSD, like you say, Aaron, in your chapter 29. In Terry's book, do we want all these PTSD people out there? It's not only this topic, by the way, it is also Bigfoot encounters. I've been reading more about that, and I live here in Colorado. When I started looking at where the encounters had happened, they're not too far away from here. Estes Park area, some parks around here. People off, the one guy who encountered one in a park that I hike in frequently said he didn't even want to report it for 10 years. He's a PhD in microbiology. He didn't want the stigma. But he saw something really tall and big right there one night. He used to like to go up at night. He said it took him 10 years to report it. So it's just, you wonder, is all of this data and evidence building up? It has nowhere to go because our society took the route that we're just going to say it's ice crystals and weather balloons and misidentifications of bear that like to walk on 2 legs.
Really, really tall ones.
Really tall bears that just like to walk on 2 legs.
You know what I think? I don't think that we bear the ultimate responsibility. I think E.T. has some level of influence over us. I really do. When I wrote, I don't know, Aaron, if you experienced this or not, but when I wrote Incident at Devil's Den, I felt terrible guilt. I felt like I was violating a fiduciary duty, or telling family secrets. It was it was difficult for me to
That's
process
interesting.
and move through. Did you have that?
Quite
That's
the
very interesting.
opposite. It's mine was quite the opposite, and it
Yeah.
makes me wonder if it's a generational difference. It makes me wonder if you know the the going back to Schrodinger and the double slit, and let's just keep all this silent, and it's been so inundated. Then you've got Roswell, no, it didn't happen. And even down to the Men in Black, where if something happens, you've got this creepy creature who comes to tell you not to talk about it
Right.
anymore.
Right.
I have not had that. When it came to me telling my story, it was a very loud push from ET, from these other beings saying, you've got to do this, you've got to write it, you've got to get it out, and you've got to do it now. Granted, they told me that for 20 freaking years before I could actually get it out. But and that's why I named my book The Dirty Little
In
Secret.
the
Because
background on your shelf there that we see. Yeah.
yes, and that's the dirty little secret is
That's
this
the dirty little,
is
got it.
exactly. It has nothing to do with, well, there is weird sexual stuff that happens, but it really is this, am I going to lose my job if I come out and talk about
Right.
this? And that's
Right.
mhm.
That is the fear of many people, right? Am I going to lose my
Absolutely.
job? Pilots, civilian
Oh, yeah.
pilots,
Academia?
academia.
Is it going to ruin my relationships?
Right. And it
That's
can
good.
be challenging. It's really, isn't that what it is? You're hitting the nail on the head. Am I going to lose? I'm at this fear. I'm going to lose friends and jobs from talking. And so many people find it more convenient. I was told on the Nimitz, Terry, the USS Nimitz, I think I was interviewing one of the guys. It was PJ Hughes. And someone chimed in who was in the chat room. I said, how many people would know? He said, had to be thousands who knew about this, what was happening. Thousands of witnesses potentially who, the scuttlebutt in the Navy. People are talking on the ship and guys are coming aboard, seizing the hard drives.
Air Force helicopter appearing in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah. Taking out the radar from the helicopters. They had to go back to San Diego. The Princeton ended up, do you know this? That's what one of the witnesses said. They woke up and they're in the harbor because you can't use the helicopter without all the parts. It's against some Navy regulation to be out there unless everything is working. You can't confiscate something. Oh, it was something that was some detector from the helicopter. Anyway, there's a lot of pressure from different sides. Now, if what you're saying, Terry, is true, that it's also coming from ET, then we're really in a challenging position because I'm coming at it from the point of view that we know that physicists post World War II were told to shut up and calculate. We need those atomic weapons. We don't care why about these. The theory dropped out. We don't care why double slit happens. We just need bigger and better atomic weapons than the Soviets. Make them, get it working, right? All the people that worked in the Manhattan Project and post World War II, right? We can understand that back then. I mean, the Soviet Union was like, this big baddie. It wasn't a very nice thing. And it was a legitimate threat. If you've looked into the history of the Soviet Union, it wasn't really a very positive enterprise as far as we can tell. A lot of people in concentration camps, the whole deal.
Yes.
But the government said, we need the bombs. We don't care. And that's where we've been for a long time, Terry. Don't interfere with the war. Don't interfere with this huge government-funded physics research project into atomic weapons because we need the weapons. And I understand, but we're a long time past that.
Isn't that a shift from thinking in a fractal into that thinking in a rigid fashion that we started the conversation with?
I think so, because we used to have scientists sit around and they had these Solvay conferences in Europe. It was some wealthy industrialist who sponsored these, I believe. They had 5. And these quantum physicists would sit around. You can see these photos of these Solvay conferences, and they would debate for a couple of days and try to come to what does double slit mean and all this. And we kind of got, to my view, Terry, we got this monoculture that developed in the West, especially in the US, around the Cold War. It made us focused on surviving a war with the Soviet Union. I remember the bomb drills when I was a kid, ducking cover. I don't know what that would have done, but yeah. So there was this fear, and I still remember the drills in elementary school where we'd have to all go down to the basement. And anyway, that's my track on it as an academic, is that sort of military industrial complex that C. Wright Mills wrote about, called The Power Elite, sociologist. Yeah. Anyway, you can trace it from the Cold War, from the Manhattan Project, and a real reluctance to go back to a more open scientific point of view, because what that started after World War II was a big funding engine called the National Science Foundation and all these defense advisory research boards. I mean, a lot of funding flowed to universities and research institutes. There were some big beneficiaries of it, including SRI, which created remote viewing, which we're all happy with. But that, from my, and I'm not saying that's all there is, Terry, but that's how I trace it in terms of federal government involvement in science. From what you're saying, Aaron, this theoretical point of view, we would sit around and talk. Einstein and all the other, they would debate Niels Bohr. They would really debate. Yeah. And it stopped after World War II, and it just became shut up. And you want your funding? All the way to Edward Condon here at CU with the Condon Report, where he followed what the Air Force told him to do, pretty much was find a way to shut this down, this UFO issue. The only thing is they never did stop studying it. They just weren't talking about it. And that's where we are now. Can we get it back to the public where we have honest discussions without fear? I don't know, but I hope we can do it.
I hope so. You know, the duck and cover thing, I remember, and that was a blatant lie. You know, I'm sorry, but you know, getting under the newspaper or
right,
and you know, is not going to do anything. But I think that was a calculated, intentional program of misinformation to make people believe that a nuclear attack is very survivable. No big deal. You know, find a place to be safe. Yeah,
remain calm. We survived that, didn't we? We survived the Cold War.
We did. Cuban Missile Crisis.
I remember all this. I mean, I was born during the Cuban War, but I remember the feeling. And it's just that we live in another time now. And can we, I know there are people in the government and in the military that want to bring this forward. Some of them have come out recently. Luis Elizondo, who came over to you to talk to you, Terry, if I remember correctly. You sent me some photos.
Yeah, spent 2 days here. Yeah, looking for helicopters.
Chris Mellon, you know, third down, I believe, at the Pentagon. Pretty high level job. It's a long title he had, but it was basically to coordinate with the other Senate and tell, you know, he did a lot of coordination for. And these folks are telling us it's high time we have a national discussion on this issue. Luis Elizondo, I don't know how many times he can say this. He said this over and over, every interview, every major media network. We need to have a national conversation. I can tell you from having been in ATIP, we haven't seen the best stuff because it's classified, but we need to talk about what's going on in our airspace and also on the ground. It's just an opportunity to finally, we have the tools, Terry and Aaron. We have the internet, we have these podcasts, we have Zoom. We can have a national discussion without all physically getting together in the same room.
Right.
We can do it this way and we can learn. And this is what Hal Puthoff talked about in 2018 at the SSC IRVA, International Remote Viewing Association, where I got to talk to Ingo many times. I've been going to those conferences since they started in 99.
Wow.
20 years of IRVA conferences. Yeah. And Hal Puthoff said the biggest risk here is not ET. It's our own lack of information, our own ignorance, stovepiping, that we don't have a national discussion. So Hal said it, Luis Elizondo said it, Chris Mellon. I don't know how many people need to come forward who worked really deep in the military intelligence community, did their jobs, what they were, you know, and they're telling us we need to talk about this so that we don't have a Sputnik moment where one day we're looking up and we see a tic tac flying around and it's our adversaries figured it out before we did. And we fall behind by magnitudes of scientific development. If you don't think it could happen, look right now with this issue over solar energy. President Biden wants to move us in a solar direction. He has these initiatives he's put forward. He talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And they're finding we don't have solar capability in the US. Not on the scale that he wants to do it. It's all in China. All the big solar companies are in China. We have companies here that make inverters and electronics, but the panels, China. So that's a Sputnik moment. You realize you've fallen behind. We would all love to go more to solar and less to fossil fuels. It's good in every possible way, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have companies here that make solar panels in any scale. We have to rely on a country that we're criticizing a lot from their human rights violations in the Uyghur region,
Yes.
which has come up with Bitcoin and where is this being mined and how this concentration camps that they have. I'm sorry, I don't know other way to put that.
That's exactly what it is.
Re-education camps. We find that abhorrent in the US. We don't like that. It's against every principle that we Americans have. But if we want the solar, we've got to get it from these companies, some of which could have been produced by forced labor. So that's the Sputnik moment. We don't want it to happen with the UAP technology. So that's how I feel about it, guys. Let's have the hard discussion. We can do this. Let's have meetings funded by what's wrong with having meetings about this to bring witnesses forward? Your book, my book, anyone's book. And let's just, Raymond Fowler's book, let's start talking about this in an adult way and stop saying it's ice crystals and swamp gas, other ridiculous explanations.
Do you think that's what we're being set up for right now with the that 180 days till the releasing of all of these documents that I think is coming up in June sometime?
It's not too far away, right?
Right. And I know that there's more and more being leaked out. I have people that just send me things like, have you seen this? And it's, another one of those pyramid things. And it's like, oh my gosh, here we go. There's more. It's coming. You guys.
There is so much there. Terry, you've talked to these witnesses. You and I know people that we've just talked to. Gary Sterling served at Minot, got burned by a UFO, following orders to go out and look what's setting off the alarms. And he and his buddy, just like you and Toby, they get burned on the right side from this energy, from this thing. He said it was too bright to look at. He couldn't even tell the shape, Terry, because it was so freaking bright. I've talked to Gary a bunch of times. And David Noble Whitecrow, he's serving on the USS Finch in 1962, I believe.
Yeah, for Operation
Dominique.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
They're ordered to stand on board, go to deck and look at it, and they see this huge cylinder come by with this blue plasma, and it goes into the waterway out there. And then they're told, just like you have a story about that from Operation Wigwam. David and I looked this up, by the way. We did a little episode about your witness here. Yes. Scott is his name, I believe.
That's the name we use, but yeah.
What are these guys experiencing these things coming out of the water around these nuclear explosions?
What was amazing was that the thing didn't break a wave. He just went on and on about how amazing that was to see this thing come out of the water and not break a wave.
That's what David said. They watched this thing. David met the diver that went down. He runs into the diver at Guantanamo Bay, the staff, the Marine Master Chief.
Yeah.
Who he just runs into him. And the guy says, I have this great story. And David has to know what it is. And it turns out, he said, well, there was this thing that went down, same date that David saw it. I was ordered to dive and check it out. He had a panic attack down there. So huge. So he said you could see shadows walking around. He wouldn't go down a second time. They said, we're court-martialing you if you don't go down again, according to David. And this guy,
I believe that,
says, I'm not going down. No way. That thing, terrifying, right? Something. And well, the story what David said is what the guy told him is when it came up, it didn't break a wave, didn't make any wave, just like your guy.
The guy said the same thing. And
other people have said it. Franklin Carter's talked about this too. A witness who's deceased for a bunch of years, used to live in Colorado here, not too far away in Fort Collins, Aaron. And I remember talking to him a couple of times. He was one of Steve Gurr's witnesses for the disclosure, but the same thing. So we have these witnesses talking about your witness and David. So, what is it? These objects, they don't break a wave when they go in and out of the water in a wake. A huge objects, twice the size of a football field, according to David, what they saw, what the Master Chief said he saw. And what makes it hard to talk about it is your guy, Scott, who you call Scott, he says they come aboard and say, you're not going to tell your sweetie, you're not going to tell your barber, you're not going to tell anyone. Same thing with David. I asked David, they did look for cameras, just like your guy said. They stripped down
packets. Yeah.
Yeah, same damn thing. They did it in 60s. Your guy said 55. Same thing. So I've got a story in Black Swan Ghosts of, a friend of mine who was a pilot who said that the co-pilot one day they're flying back to Dull. He says, well, I got this story from the early, I believe it was the late 70s Yom Kippur War or something, where they were sending Operation Chrome Dome over the Soviet-Turkish border to kind of encourage the Soviets not to interfere.
Yes.
And this guy told them these things came out at a 45-degree out from higher up above their B-52s and circled around the convoy of 4 craft, caused a lot of electrical interference, radio stopped working, all this stuff. And this guy tells my witness in here that he had a picture from his wife had given him a camera at Christmas, and he radioed back once the objects left radio communication. He said, we saw these things. When they land, wherever they land, these B-52s are refueled. They probably land back at Omaha or somewhere. There are guys waiting for him on the tarmac saying, give us, what do you think they said? Give us the film.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll give you the camera back, and don't ever talk about it. And he didn't tell anybody. They never gave him the camera back. Not just the film. They didn't give him the camera back. You experienced the same thing with your interview after your experience.
They were scared to death. I had a 36 exposure roll of pictures of this thing, and I wish I had. God.
Oh, you did. So you didn't bring your good camera, but you had a small one.
Toby had a camera. Toby had a camera in his backpack.
You forgot the one you wanted to bring, but
and that's really strange. I'm not that inept. I mean, that was the whole purpose of the exercise for me, was to go down there and photograph stuff. But
Toby had the little instant kit.
Yeah, but you know what? That would have been something. Yeah, it would have been a small negative.
And he got pictures of it?
No, we never thought of it.
Never
crossed our mind. Never crossed our mind.
I understand. No, of course, you're in a very strange situation. How are you going to think of camera?
We were in a strange place.
But it's hard enough to talk about this without these enforcers coming through, not just the men in black, whoever they are. Mm-hmm. On what you're talking about, Terry, on the other side, maybe they don't want you talking, but your own government's telling you, you'll never talk about it again. David Shindelli, who was at the citizen hearing on Disclosure 2013, he served at Minot in 66. And he was a missile control launch officer. He wrote a book that I have back here on one of these shelves. He called it Never Happened. And he said, he had seen on the news reports of UFOs in the area on the local TV station. He shows up for work one day. All the missiles are down in his particular unit. He's responsible for 10 missiles as the missile control launch. He shows up, none of them are working. And they tell him a little later, don't ever talk about this to anybody. And when the repair crew showed up to fix the missiles, he couldn't talk about it because they had told him don't talk. And he never told a soul for 30 years, he said, until Robert Salas came forward and said, we're doing this citizen hearing. And he finally starts talking, writes his book. They told him it never happened. It never happened. This is what we're dealing with, folks. How many ridiculous
control officers are there out there? Thousands. How many of them had their boards go down and they've never said a word? I mean,
that's what I'm saying. How many witnesses they've followed, they've been told it never happened. Don't say a word. And to this day, they aren't. So Terry, when all these witnesses come forward that you served with at Whiteman Air Force Base and the other places where you worked, when these people come out of the woodwork, when they're encouraged, I mean, do you think something's going to happen? Because I know there are a lot of these folks out there, like we're talking missile control launch officers. I ran into one at a UFO conference, the Open Minds UFO conference, the last one they held out at Fountain Hills, Arizona, near Scottsdale. And this guy came up to me. I was talking to him. I have his picture, actually. And he said he was a missile control launch officer at Malmstrom, Great Falls, Montana.
Was this back in the 60s before the Minutemen, when they had the Atlas?
That's what they had, but he was in there in the 80s.
Oh, okay.
And he said part of their training, they were told about these UFO incidents. that UFOs, they were told this as part of their training. He told me that this could happen. They didn't say it was power failure and all those conventional explanations. They said, we've had this happen. You should be prepared for it. It's part of the training. This guy was there in the 80s. So, I mean, I don't know, guys. I'm just like, I think this is really big, and I want it to come forward in a constructive way. We're Americans here, and we do things we have a process with Robert's Rules of Order. You're a former attorney, Terry. You know there's a process in court to present evidence and witnesses and look at it. And you could have the other side try to take these witnesses apart or something. You could have another point of view. I'm not against counter explanations, but the witnesses should be allowed to present their point of view. And the
question is, how high is the bar set? I mean, how much do you have to prove? I mean, you know, December 17, 2017, with Leslie Kean's New York Times article should have been enough to take us there.
You would think so.
What kind of event is going to happen? You know, I mean, if the flying saucers landed on the UN parking lot, people are going to say, oh, well, that was hoaxed. You know, I mean, what level of magnitude would it have to be for everyone to say, oh my God, that stuff's real?
What do you think, Aaron? You're an experiencer. What do you think it's going to take? Because could come in a lot of ways.
Right. I think that it's going to have to be on all fronts. And I think that it is happening on all fronts. You know, Terry and I have talked in almost every single episode we have done of this podcast so far is what was started happening in 2018. What has brought so many experiencers to just finally say, no, it is time. I have to get my story out, because there are so many books published then that I wasn't published till 2020, but I had already started writing my book at that point in time. Terry's book comes out in 2018, and there are many, many others who are writing at this time. Yeah, Bruce, Sev Talk published in 2018. There's so
Nancy
many
Tremaine.
of us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting year.
What brought us to this point? And I didn't know Terry then. I met Terry in 2018. I had already started writing, but there's this huge push from someplace, and I'm going to say it's in one of those dark matter places where we can't necessarily see, is this big push, right, to get it out there.
There has to be a legal process around it that gives witnesses a forum and respect to present their case. I was watching this. There were a couple of days ago, guys. There was an NBC 7-8 minute episode on this subject for NBC News. You can find it on YouTube. Very long. They talked about the Navy incidents. They had Luis Elizondo there, but they also had someone who I'm not that familiar with, but I've come across her writing sometimes, Sarah Skulls, who works for Wired magazine. And I remember, I believe, her writing about the citizen hearing, not in a tremendously positive way. She's more of a skeptic. Yeah. One of these people who believes it's a cultural phenomena, perhaps. It's stories, people, you know, there's counter explanations and so forth. But she said, well, there's just not enough evidence. That's the problem. And I thought, it's not there's not enough evidence. There's no willingness to look at the evidence from the institutions that we are willingness to look at the evidence. If you don't think there's enough evidence, you haven't been reading books. Okay. And I read things called books. They're paper books, and I read them, and I learn a lot about different subjects that way. And they go on and on. There's plenty of evidence. I also read science every week. There's more evidence in there, but I'm waiting for these to come together. So don't keep perpetuating. It's infuriating to you have citizen hearing, 5 days of international witnesses, including one guy that had a dogfight with a UFO from Peru, Oscar Santa Maria. You've heard about this guy. He had the order to go up, and this thing is evading him, and he lets go all of his cannon rounds into it in this Soviet Sukhoi plane, I believe. Each round is this long, could take out a truck.
Yes.
Nothing. It just doesn't even bounce. Absorbs. What can absorb 30 cannon rounds, foot-long cannon rounds that are slugs of depleted uranium that could destroy a tank?
Whatever it wasn't made at Boeing.
Right. there's evidence. You actually have to sit down and, well, you guys know what the deal is, and so does our audience. There's someone has to, perhaps this big phone home event that took place last weekend, where the point was to get us to call our senators and congressmen.
Yes.
Now maybe that and Aaron, you mentioned this before. There's this 180-day report. I believe it's not just one report. I think it's a directive to report once in a while to the Senate Intelligence. Maybe that'll do it. Maybe there will be something, could be something in there. The Pentagon says, we want to get this off our back. Let someone else study UFOs. Okay, it's real. We don't know what it is. I don't know what they'll say, but that could be it. There has to be a way for the process that we all grew up around, this democratic republic process that deals with subjects. We had a civil rights movement. Terry, you probably know people that participated in the civil rights movement. I knew people that went, I was too young for it, but some of my teachers in high school had gone down to the South. Some of them didn't come back from that. So we have processes, and it's not always easy, right? We had a civil war in this country 160 years ago. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. But we have processes to work these things out without going at each other's throats. And you start by actually having adult conversations.
People want peer review. You know, they want hard data in a journal. You know, prove it to me. You know,
well,
I had a guy walk up to me at a conference and said, you know, I heard your talk. Convince me. I'm like, I'm not going to convince anybody of anything. I'm going to tell you objectively, without embellishing, what I experienced, and you make up your mind. And I frankly don't care.
Well, the better we have people, you know, a lot of people, we haven't had a lot of support, Terry. You are one of the few brave people to come forward from your line of work to say, it happened to me. I went for x-rays. There were these implants in there. I can't explain them. Did you ever talk to Roger Lear, Dr. Roger Lear, who did the implant removal?
He died in 2014.
Right.
I discovered my implants in 2012.
Yeah.
But he had lost his podiatry credentials in the state of California and had moved to South America somewhere.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Did he lose it related to the UFO, or was there some impropriety there or something, or what?
It was related to UFO. The California Board of Medical
because of the implant removal.
Board of Medical Practice. Yeah, what he did was he took on film. He took out not granted, he's a skilled surgeon.
Yes,
but he took out a sliver, an alleged implant from someone's forearm, and they had it on film. And then he stitched it up. And the problem is, if you're a podiatrist, your territory begins at the ankle and ends at the toes, and I see. You have no authority to work above that level, and that.
I understand. You know, I met him many times. I talked with him many times. That's evidence. He always said they had New Mexico Tech and MIT analyze these samples. It always came back as extraterrestrial, meaning meteoric, non-Earth alloys. Right. That's a type of evidence. I think the evidence is there. You have the SCU group, Scientific Coalition for Study UFOs, that formed recently.
You know, Daryl Sims, who worked with Roger Lear, has a little presentation case with full of implants, full of
Terry,
anomalous objects.
I met Daryl in 1997 here in Denver. There was a UFO conference. I went to my first UFO conference in 1997.
Whoa.
I just got curious, having taken remote viewing, and some people from NASA. I was teaching at Farsight, and we had people who had worked for NASA, a former astronaut, civilian astronaut, never actually flew, but trained, and a guy working to copy 16 millimeter film to video. He invented a device in the 80s to transfer from 16 millimeter to video with very high resolution. Yeah. And both these guys said NASA's covering up a lot. And I thought, really? And they knew their stuff. These were people that had worked for NASA. Yeah. Yeah. And I thought, wow, it's real. I mean, it's really real. So I went to a UFO conference, and there was Daryl Sims with these implants. And I got to pick them up in the little cases. And he said, well, this one came out of someone's eye. It looks like a grain of rice. And luckily someone was in the room and said, hey, what is that? The woman said, just throw it away. I said, what? This case came out of your eye. And he looked at it, and we could look at this thing, and we saw it under the microscope. And Daryl said, this isn't a grain of rice. It just looks that way. It's actually a piece of micro technology. And he went through all the other. So that's how it started for me, was seeing those up close and being able to look at them.
Yeah. I had a lady contact me who said she had a migraine headache. I don't even remember if I put her story in the book or not, but she had a migraine headache. And, she had medication, nothing helped. And she was standing at her sink, getting ready for bed in the bathroom. And she felt a sneeze coming on. She had this like tremendous sneeze into a tissue. And it felt like it was bloody. And she opened it up, and there was a big piece of blood in it. There was blood in the tissue, but also there was a little silver sphere. And without thinking, she folded it up, dropped it in the toilet, and flushed it. And as soon as she flushed it, she thought, "Oh my God, what did I do? I should have taken it to my doctor."
No, this is, Terry, you alluded to this a little ways back. People somehow feel they shouldn't talk about it and they should throw it away. Mm-hmm. And then they wonder, wait a minute, what was that, right? It's strange. Now, I'm open to another point of view. If there are people that think there's some obvious explanation that you got hit with a small piece of a meteorite, you forgot, I don't know, maybe there's something else. I'm open to evidence, but I've never heard any convincing counter explanations for these little pieces. Roger Lear even showed us under the microscope as they're operating, these little things with these probes coming out when they put a magnet near it.
Yes.
Like arms. Did you see that?
I did see that.
I still remember that from the conference. Little arms coming out of this thing. And then one of them moved as they were operating. It starts migrating down.
Whitney tells the story about a doctor chasing the implant around.
We saw the video of that. Dr. Lear showed us this, and I talked to him many times, and he could answer every question I asked. He wasn't fooling around. The isotopes, this is a big topic. And I think the evidence is there, but you have to be willing to actually want to honestly look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, people are so distracted. People, I think that, you and I and Aaron and the people that we know, we're absorbed by this topic. But, there are just a whole lot of people. It's the majority of people out there that are so involved with their job and their lives and their television and distractions that, this is like way, way down on their list of priorities, and they'd rather not be bothered.
I understand it, but we have representatives whose job it is to deal with reality, senators and representatives, and
that are worried that they're not going to get reelected if they.
Well, that's the issue. I talked to Merrill Cook, who was at the citizen hearing. They couldn't get any sitting representatives or senators because they all said, "I won't get reelected." Isn't that a shame? I won't get reelected. So they had to pay retired congressmen and senators. One of them was Merrill Cook from Utah, Salt Lake City. I had lunch with him a bunch of times. I called him on the phone afterwards. I said, "Merrill, what did you think about all the evidence?" He goes, I was convinced. I came in as open-minded skeptic. I'm concerned about aircraft safety. It's obvious. I've done some of my own research into this since the citizen hearing. I'm convinced this is an aircraft safety issue. There might have been accidents that have happened that we weren't told the full story of what caused the crash. And then he goes to the Open Minds conference a year or two later and said he had talked to other representatives about this. And he said, why don't you bring it up in Congress? And they said, we receive money from black budget projects not to talk about it. That's what Merrill Cook said. This is not our conversation. He said this on stage. We receive funding from the black budget programs. They have budgets to cover up what they do, like 10 times, like most of the money there is to cover up what they do. And there's some money that's for, political action purposes. Sure. And what Merrill said is they told him, we won't get reelected because we won't get these funding from these programs. I'm not making this up. You can listen to Merrill.
No, Cooks. I believe it, but that's just incredible. Play the game, play
corrupt.
Along.
It is corrupt, and people have been saying this. It would appear to be right. I haven't heard that from other people, but Merrill said it on stage, and he would know because he ran for Senate. He's a big fish in Utah, And
Yeah.
he was honest to me on the phone that this is real. And then he says a couple of years later, he tried to find out why it doesn't get brought up. And they said, we can't talk about it because we're being paid re-election. We get re-election money to not bring it up. But guys, we shouldn't be too negative. It could change. It could change. We've got the report coming out in June. We have people from the TTSA or who've worked with TTSA. And we've got Marco Rubio. We've got Senator Harry Reid, who's keeps talking about this, and people who are actually senators right now who are obviously a little disturbed by this. This should disturb them that there's something going on here. They don't have the full story. Pentagon isn't sharing it with them. They're not happy about that because obviously if the Pentagon isn't sharing this information, well, what else aren't they sharing that the Senate Intelligence Committee and other relevant committees have the right to know about as part of our legal process, right? Balance of power.
Lots.
It's a constitutional issue. So I think if we present it, Terry, from a legal point, this is a constitutional issue. Is there like as Stanton Friedman used to say, is there like a cosmic Watergate? As so many people have been doing what Merrill Cook talked about. I'm just not going to talk about it. For whatever reason, pushing under the rug, as you said, Aaron. Mm-hmm. Will that, I don't know, guys, but this is what I'm thinking is at some point you have younger and younger people coming into government who don't find this acceptable anymore, who just say, well, wait a minute, the Marco Rubios and others. It's classified so far who's got these briefings, but we know Marco Rubio's bugged him. Is, well, wait a minute, why aren't we're supposed to hear everything that the Pentagon knows? We direct them, we tell them what to do. It's a civilian agency. It's not run by the military, it has a civilian leadership, right? So they have to tell us for funding reasons what's going on, or we can't appropriate a budget properly, right? And that's guys, that's how I look at it. It's going to come down to a legal constitutional issue, and people are going to do the right thing. And they're going to say there's hundreds, if not more, of Terry Lovelaces out there who had these experiences in the service, and they were told not to talk about it. They were mildly threatened and coerced. Yes. Going all the way back to Roswell, by the way. Mm-hmm. Yes. Don't say anything. Kids in Roswell were threatened. Yes. Children. Mm-hmm. And there's something about in our DNA as Americans that finds that abhorrent. We don't like children being threatened by the military.
Absolutely.
And this has gone on long enough, and it's just going to come down to a constitutional legal thing. I'm convinced. I don't care how many cynics tell me, oh, nothing's ever going to change. It changes because we had civil rights in this country. Yeah, people died, but we had it happen, and it progresses. It doesn't stop in our society as far as I'm concerned. I don't see any, we're always extending franchise to more people. We want things to be fair. We want wages to be fair. We want voting to be fair, and we want this to be fair too. That's what I think. That's my point of view.
I hope so. God, I hope so. I hope that sense of fairness and fair play and doing what's right will rule the day.
And it'll play out over decades.
I think it already has. There have been deaths.
Oh, there have, but I'm saying the opening, the disclosure, whatever you want to call this reopening. Mm-hmm. We talk about this with COVID, the reopening. It's got to happen with this topic. That's what I'm saying, Aaron. Yeah, mm-hmm. It is. I was just looking at some of James Mcdonald's testimony. The astronomer from University of Arizona, that we don't know exactly why he killed himself in the end. I mean, he was having marital issues, but he was really attacked by Phil Klass, and I think he lost funding.
Was this a carbon monoxide death?
No, it was his own shooting, and he failed the first time and then successfully killed himself a couple of weeks later with a handgun, I believe. He had someone drive him out to the desert. It appears that's what it was. I guess there are other alternatives, but so Aaron, we have had tragedies and deaths associated from witnesses. McDonald was a brilliant guy. I was listening to some of his testimony. It was great stuff. He was looking at statistics from Blue Book and Condon, saying it doesn't make sense. Just the type of stuff we'd like. These guys, 20% unexplained. You're saying, are you kidding me? Like in our language, like, hello, 20%? What's that? You don't have 20% unexplained sightings of things. That's a phenomena. Anyway, we have had people who didn't make it because of this. Many, I'm sure.
Phil Schneider.
Others.
Tom Reed's father.
Yeah, we've had casualties here. And we don't know how many others, Terry. were suicided, so to speak.
Right.
David Noble Whitecrow mentioned one of these ships coming back that he said had got good radar data from a UFO, and the sonar man was found deceased.
I know the story.
You know the story. They couldn't open
locked
the hatch.
Locked inside the radar hut in the very front of the vessel, and the door was jammed. And
oh, you know about this story then?
I do, and they had to use
weld the torch. Did you learn about this from David, or did you hear about this other ways?
I heard about this, I thought, from your show.
Yeah. So David said that he was told that they had like a half an hour of radar contact with a USO. And they sent that ship back, he said, with escort to Seattle or Bainbridge. Yes, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think he said the one in Seattle area naval bases, but whatever it was, that's what it was. And he remember when he told us that, he was even disturbed telling the story again. We're talking about those sort of casualties of people that have exposed to the truth. You survived your encounter and your interrogations, and to live the day, to have a podcast, Terry, we're so thankful, write books, and inspire other people to come forward. But this is what we need, is we have to, I think only good things are going to come from getting over this fear, having the process work. It'll reinforce our faith in the system, that the system works, right? We're open, we look at evidence, we have transparency, we have a process. We can actually all watch on TV. We can watch Congress debate this. We've had the hearings on, how many hearings do we watch when they bring people forward from Silicon Valley, privacy? We watch that ad nauseum, right? Where are the witnesses in this topic? People of your caliber, Terry. This has to happen. It has to happen. We have to have open hearings on this and find out what, we don't even know what's been going on, Terry. You and I are just, we read as much as we can. We have our own perspectives. What is going on? How many people have suffered from being exposed to this, not through any fault of their own? Anyway, you guys know what I'm saying. We have to do this, and it's going to start in June. That's mine. It's going to start, and we're going to believe America can do it. Well, I'm just saying there. So over decades, we'll deal with the topic. We'll bring it out. We'll find out who the visitors are. We can maybe have dialogues with them and conversations. We don't like it when you come down and pick people up like they did to you, Terry.
Yes.
And if this is government's cooperating with this, we don't only like it even more.
Have you heard that the cattle mutilations in Oregon are through the roof again?
There you go.
Are they really?
What's doing that? And I think we can handle it because we talk to each other. As Americans, we talk to each other, we talk to our friends, we do, and we have discussions. We just have this tradition of a couple hundred years of having open discussion. And
there was a time when reasonable minds could disagree on a topic, but I fear that we become so divisive that standard's not where it used to be. So
you might be right.
And I try to be optimistic. I want to be.
I just want to start on an optimistic note. Maybe it won't go as well as we can think, but I've seen our country deal with difficult times.
No, you're right.
Nobody does it like we do in the US. We have process. Well, the UK has their own process too. They're the model for our system, but we debate it. We have representatives. We present evidence. It's how it's done. This topic is the same way. And you didn't have Elizondo, Mellon, and Hal Puthoff come forward and others and say, guys, it's time to have a national discussion before we lose out. Whatever this turns out to be, and we didn't even get into that. Is it multidimensional? Is it ET visitors? Is it ultra terrestrial? Apparently there's some people from TTSA that think it's another race of beings that have been here on the planet the whole time that we didn't know about. Maybe. I don't know.
Time travelers, who knows?
Time travel, but I say we have a discussion with them. We sit them down. So we don't like this, and this. We're not going to accept this anymore. But, we would like to interact with you. Don't just come and take us out of our house at night. We're not really into that. We like to sleep at night.
Yeah.
I like to sleep too.
Anyway,
that's the message that I'm receiving from them. I know that's way off of the current topic, but the information I get from ET is Will you please help everybody get over their trauma and their fears, because we want to have a conversation with you, but we cannot, if you're coming from a fear state or a state where you don't want to deal with it. We want to talk, but we can't with you guys acting the way you're doing right now.
Yeah, they have to cooperate too. And I think they need to see that we're ready as a country. And then they'll say, okay, now we can show up, and they won't flip out.
Right.
Start shooting at us or whatever they're going to do.
Yeah. The truth comes out. There won't be riots in New York or Tokyo.
Right.
It'll be,
And when they legalized marijuana here in Colorado, I remember reading editorials. They said, this is not going to end well. There's going to be people running around the streets. They're going to be high as kites. It's going to encourage crime. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen. They've revised it. Every state that's dealt with legalization has dealt with this in its own way. And you get more you make it safer and more labeling, kid preventative. You'd find ways to make it safe.
Sure, of course.
And they did it here in Colorado, as far as I'm concerned. And so it saves a lot of law enforcement enforcing something you don't need to be enforcing anymore, right?
Yeah, why worry about it? I mean, I spent a year as a prosecutor prosecuting domestic assault cases and sexual assaults, domestic assaults. You know how many domestic assault cases, I mean, a lot of them. You know how many I found where marijuana was a chief factor? 0, none. Alcohol, everyone.
Yeah.
But no.
Yeah, we all know people that behave pretty badly around alcohol, but you don't find that around pot. And so legalization, guys, it's another good example of how things can change. Yeah. That's the perfect example, I think. You had the first 2 states were Washington and Colorado. New York just 2 weeks ago legalized. Yes. It's more liberal than Colorado. I know someone back there, he said, you can smoke marijuana now anywhere it's legal to smoke a cigarette. That isn't even how it is in Colorado. You can't smoke in public places. I don't think they'll arrest you, but you're not supposed to. So if New York State can do it and tax it the way it should be and use the funding for education, what the hell?
Absolutely.
What's wrong with that? That's the way it should be. You organize it, you tax it, you regulate it, and now it's one less law enforcement issue, right? That you're wasting law enforcement resources on something that's not a crime. Never was a crime, really, as far as I was concerned. Because in New York, decriminalized when I was in high school there, but then they went back. They did decriminalize. And I thought
Michigan did the same thing. Yeah. Around Ann Arbor, you could, they made this civil infraction to write you a ticket for $3 or something. Yeah.
And now you could tax it, make more money taxing it than giving people tickets, and everyone's happier that way.
I'm in Texas. They'll lock you up.
Still lock you up over there for it, right?
Absolutely.
So look how things. So that's the argument we use, folks. When people say it can't change, it just did in New York for marijuana. New Jersey's next. Massachusetts already did it. I'm in a state where it's legal. There was no collapse, and now they're passing that banking reform, which is very important because it allows the dispensaries to use credit and banks
instead of having to have the ATM there and cash only.
I have talked to so many of these dispensaries. I said, what's it like? They're afraid of being robbed because they have hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash in the basement. And I spoke to a dispensary up in Washington State, near where I used to go to school. I went up there a couple of years ago. The Two Sisters dispensary in East Spokane. You know what she said? They had to deliver their payroll taxes in Olympia in cash because they weren't allowed to use banks. So they had to have a car filled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash for all the dispensaries in Spokane, drive out to Olympia once a month with payroll taxes.
And that means there are going to be people there with guns. And I mean,
exactly.
Why would
and this woman had her, we don't have to go too much here. This woman had her bank account closed. Personal bank account closed because they said you're involved in an illegal federal activity, an activity that the federal government considers legal, even though in Washington it was legal. They said, do you know your bank can close your account because they don't like you? So anyway, when I read that banking bill last week that I think they passed in the House, it said specifically in there that your bank can't close your account because you're involved in this, your personal account. Okay, so I'm just mentioning this as an example that things really can change. They do change. And you're a former prosecutor, Terry. Things change. If they can change around pot, they can change around UFOs. I'm sorry.
I'm optimistic now. I think seriously. You make a good argument. I mean, you really do.
I used to be on a debate team in high school. 4 years of debate team. Evidence is based on evidence. When people don't look at evidence, I get suspicious.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Why don't you want to look at the evidence? It goes all the way back to high school for me.
You know what? Dunning-Kruger effect is just
right.
I think it's Dunning-Kruger effect.
Can you remind us what that is?
I'm right, and I'm not changing my mind, no matter what you say.
Yeah, what the hell? That is not who we are. We're based on evidence. I read this thing. Every article in here is based on someone did some studies of evidence, and there's been one article 10 years ago. Where's the UFO research? Someone wrote a letter.
Yeah, you know what? There's a big push against science. I mean, there's a lot of people out there now that don't believe in science. You know?
It's science's own fault. They haven't dealt with reality.
No.
Part of it is if you don't deal with people's experiences and people are experiencing UFOs and you say it's not real, you won't trust science. The same way people don't trust it over COVID. Their science is abused. Its authority has been a little corrupted here in their science. Now they're talking about it. They talk about where's our funding coming from? Shouldn't there be fair transparency on who's serving on these boards that look at drugs for the FDA? You can't just have the pharmaceutical companies' own people on these boards, right? You kind of see what's going on there. Mm-hmm. It's the same issue. There has to be open, transparent, real. It can't just be rigged. If people feel it's rigged in favor of the big interest, they won't trust it. And these guys, but they recognize this. I mean, there are so many articles here now about transparency. I know it's going to come over to our issue. Same thing.
This is good. This is a good thing. If it is across the board that people are just fed up with things being shoved under the rug, there's that term again, just,
That's right.
And just being open and transparent on many different levels. This bodes very well for positive changes in this country.
No, absolutely. And they've had some articles recently here on certain drugs and things that were approved. When they looked at who was approving it, it was people that were also getting paid by the pharmaceutical industry and were serving on these FDA boards. There were some diagnoses like pre-diabetes became this diagnosis. Mm-hmm. They totally took that apart in science. Someone did their job who wrote this article for Science.
I'm very familiar with that topic. And I know the boundary line between 5.7 and 3.9 or something. Yeah, the A1C measurement.
That's right. And they concluded they're thinking it's a little hokey, that it benefited the companies that were selling pre-diabetes drugs, that maybe there was no pre-diabetes. And the reason is, Terry, is because 80% of the people that had the diagnosis of pre-diabetes never got diabetes.
I was diagnosed with pre-diabetes in 2014. I was given metformin and told that I had to alter my diet and that I had irreversible diabetes.
Did you ever get diabetes?
Pardon?
Did you get diabetes?
No, I didn't get diabetes. My A1C is like 5.1 because I quit eating sugar. I quit eating carbohydrates.
Well, that's good. Now, that is, yes, you did the right thing, but they found that diagnosis didn't lead to diabetes in too many people. And they're wondering whether the people that were diagnosing like people like you, they quote them in this article I read in Science a couple of months ago. They said they wish they'd never heard of pre-diabetes. Yeah. They think it was just how do you describe it? Something that's invented for the convenience of the medical establishment, not for the patient.
And the medical establishment is conditioned to treat the symptoms and not the underlying, nobody ever told me, hey, if you don't eat sugar and you don't eat carbohydrates, your A1C will drop like a bowling ball off a skyscraper.
You're right. No, that's good. No, the lower sugar is better for all of us. I'm glad you got that diagnosis because it helped. But whether the condition really exists, pre-diabetes, is questionable. They were saying it's questionable. That's what they're looking at. So this goes to our issue here is, are there vested interests within the scientific community that either propose something that doesn't really exist because they get a benefit, or don't talk about something because they don't want competing research?
So a lot of metformin.
Yeah, a lot of metformin and a lot of astronomers who want the funding to go to be looking at telescopes way out there, Terry. They don't want to look here.
Yeah.
SETI program.
Yes.
They want the signal out there. Where does their funding come from? Signals from out there. I'm not saying they're deliberately corrupted, NASA. I'm just saying once you get people that get that huge amount of funding in a certain direction, do they want it to be right in front of your nose, or do they want it to be, oh, the ET is way out there? You see, I mean, I'm just saying this goes a long ways, and so we need these things. Listen, it changes, and we'll end with this because we've had a good 2 hours here.
2 hours, yeah,
Right, yeah.
Thank you.
Let me end on this story. I worked at a Soviet-U.S. research institute in 1989, set up by Nixon and Brezhnev. It was called the IASA, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. They had a young scientist research program, and I applied. I said, I want to study fractals. But we're talking about chaos theory, how it applies to reality, data sets, all this. Yeah. And they only accepted 1 out of 100 applicants or something. And I got chosen to go there.
Nice.
They paid the whole way. I was there for 3 months. There was a small stipend in Vienna. I lived in Vienna for 3 months.
How cool was that?
It was great. And back in 1989, that was a hotbed of espionage. I was prepared because I had read a lot of books from defectors from the Soviet Union, just by chance. One of them worked at the University of Arizona, Viktor Suvorov, as he was called, GRU, KGB, all this stuff. They existed back then in 89. Maybe they do in another form. But I'm at this research institute, and I'm working with Soviet scientists and East German scientists. And this is 1989, by the way. And we had lengthy conversations about communism, capitalism, the whole thing. I'm sure some of them were attempting to recruit Western science, but I was prepared for that. I didn't go in that direction. I wouldn't let them mess with me. And I knew it. I knew their tricks. Yeah, I knew their tricks, gifts, all sorts of stuff. But the story is this. The Berlin Wall came down a couple months later. That was 89, summer of 89. None of those people saw it coming. And they were telling me how comfortable East Germany was if you were in with the Communist Party. I mean, screw that, but we're not raised to be loyal to any party in this country unless you choose to be, if you want to, you know. Right. But back then, that's one party society. You were in with that party that runs it, or you're not going to make it. But they said if you're in with the Communist Party, you had daycare, medical care, you know, good apartment, cars, all the things. I don't think that's their way of life. It's not what we're not into that. We're not going to be little toadies to conform to someone's point of view. That is not the American way, right? We don't do that here. But that's how they did it. And these people are smart, by the way. These were good scientists. These were sharp people. Yeah. None of them saw the Berlin Wall coming down. And it led to the end of the Soviet Union.
1 year later.
Yeah, 1 year later. Exactly. And so I remember I remember I went to Berlin that summer. I went through Checkpoint Charlie. I remember the guard dogs, the machine gun. I got interrogated by an East German soldier because I went to take a nap next to the wall and a sign that said, Eintritt verboten. I spoke German. I have taken a lot of German. I pretended like I don't know what that sign means. I was tired. I lay down on that strip of grass near the wall, and some guy with a machine gun came over. And thank God I had an American passport because, you're American. I said, yeah. He goes, okay, thank you. Yeah, that American passport, they didn't want to mess with that. But if I'd been from another country, I could have been arrested because it did say don't trespass. Anyway, I remember the wall because I went through Checkpoint Charlie. I remember the East Germany, but it disappeared. That's my whole point is it could change faster than you know. And Terry, am I right? Nobody saw the Berlin Wall coming down.
Not a soul, no.
No one.
That's a very good analogy. I mean, that really is the best. That's the best analogy to drive home your point that, things could change and do it like that. I mean, it could happen.
It can happen here, guys. It can happen. Don't doubt it. There are too many witnesses, too many experiencers. I've been to too many UFO conferences, had too many conversations. I've talked to too many scientists, including people that don't want to come forward yet. Some of them have, like you've seen in my YouTube channel, Terry. We know there are other people there that are still concerned that if they come forward, there's going to be consequences. But let's say that shifts and all of a sudden they're rewarded for telling their story. I mean, there could be hundreds of really high-level people coming forward, right, Terry? That say, I looked at this piece of wreckage. We don't even know.
Stories that explode. The stories would explode.
It's exploding now over little triangular things and drones or whatever those things. Okay, whatever those things are over the Navy. There's debate on Twitter about. Some people are saying it's got to be Chinese. I don't know what they are, but we're having a lot of discussion over those little objects, but what say it's really credible witnesses, people who you wouldn't doubt if they told you they had invented X, Y, or Z. And you say, wow, that's part of my life every day. And they say, well, I was also asked to handle wreckage from Roswell. Here's what it looks like. And I'm telling you, I've spoken to these people. They're out there. They haven't come forward yet. And I'm not gonna give their names out until they want to come forward. But if I've met them randomly at conferences, other types of conferences, not UFO, just other science conferences, you know, I go to these, there got to be hundreds of these folks out there, men and women, who've just come across it, who were told not to talk about it. Maybe they were, I don't know, NDAs, they were paid, you know how it works, sorry, but that guy, it's going to cause a collapse of a kind of UFO Berlin Wall, in my view, and that's my scenario that I see happening.
I like that.
We got the press hungry for stories, content, YouTube. It's going to,
The UFO Berlin Wall. I like that maybe as a title for
there you go. That's yours. Sorry, I'm giving it to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm serious.
It's going to happen, folks.
I think it's a perfect analogy.
Don't tell me it can't happen. I saw it happen in East. Okay, so when I was there in Vienna, the wall had just come down from Hungary. Hungary had said, we are not going to have a wall with Austria anymore. And just a month or two before I got there, Hungary had stopped. That's how it started. Hungary had stopped enforcing their Iron Curtain.
Yeah, the border thing. Yeah.
And there was no invasion. No one invaded. They said, we're taking down the wire. And I walked through forests nearby Vienna where you could see the wire had been cut, the barbed wire. There were empty guard towers.
Beautiful.
And these East Germans showed up at the West German embassy, said, we're not going home. They went to Budapest, which I got to visit, full of lovely Soviet architecture. Budapest is a beautiful place, but it had this, you know, Soviet architecture doesn't win any prizes for aesthetics. Okay, let's be honest. Yeah, right. So a whole bunch of East Germans had come over there, a couple hundred. This is how it started, by the way, guys. And this is a good analogy. They had gone to the West German embassy in Vienna since there was no longer any wall. And they said, we're not going home. And the West German embassy said, we'll keep you here as long as you want to stay. That's how it starts. It starts a couple hundred people break away, do their own thing. And before you know it, the whole Soviet Union's gone. Anyway, guys, I know I'm being long-winded. I've said a lot here, but that's how it can happen. Just a couple hundred people can just,
dominoes.
That's it. UFO Berlin Wall.
UFO Berlin Wall. Got that, David? David's got it. David's on top of it.
I like it, but that's how, guys, that's one scenario, and it could happen that way because we need it. I'm not in favor of radical change just for radicalness. I want all these people with their stories to relax and tell us what they've seen. Just relax and stop being afraid that the MIBs are, that's what, Terry, you were joking about MIBs before, or was it Aaron? Did you bring this up? I've met people who think that's going to happen to them from the Air Force, Terry. If they tell what they've told me, I said, how come we can't YouTube? It was a long time ago. We're talking about 50 years ago. They said, no, the MIBs. So when that fear goes away, and it can be like a magnetic effect. If some enough people come forward, the Luis Elizondos, we don't know what those guys are doing in the background. I think, anyway, guys, I think it could happen. It's one scenario I think it could happen. And I'm looking forward to it. And we'll learn about our dark matter, dark energy universe. Yeah. A little more of it. Okay, and that's it. That's what I have to say tonight, guys.
Well, that's wonderful. I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you, guys.
Every time we sit down and talk, it's just like, you know, it just goes on and on and on. I could talk to you till midnight, you know?
Well, Terry, we got to meet at a conference sometime, you too, Aaron, when we have physical conferences again, and we have to sit down and have it out.
Yes.
Are you at Contact in the Desert?
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping it was going to be physical conference, but I've already sent them my recording.
Yeah.
So it's interesting stuff, all about the multiverse, parallel realities, the science behind it. Ooh. We got into it a little bit tonight. We kind of broached it, and it's just that it's serious. It's serious. It's a serious way to look at things. It's not just science fiction anymore. So
it's not.
Yeah.
And should remind the audience, please like and subscribe because we're really trying to get this thing off the ground. We'd appreciate it, and we'd love you for it.
Well, thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun. We went 2 hours. We had planned an hour, Terry. Look, we're 2 hours.
I know.
So much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Good Lord.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure meeting you.
You too, Aaron. And you guys take care. And I'm sure we'll be talking again.
We will soon. Absolutely.
Okay. Take care for now, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
All right, good night. Bye-bye.
Standing under the great beyond, when darkness covered the land, stars and planets swirl around as the moon's darkest span. Wonder what else is out there from other worlds and times. What threads can connect to here? Am I able